Hello everyone, it's Brett here, Lionheart84, and I thought I'd do a short video of something different today rather than just looking at plants. Talk about a subject that interests me and whether or not it's worth the effort to try and do it. Zone pushing. Now what I mean by that when it comes to fruit trees is the attempt to grow outside Mediterranean and subtropical fruit plants all year round that are not realistically suitable for the British climate but can, in the right circumstances, survive outside. Now, the point that I was going to cover on this basically is we're talking here about citrus, avocados, potentially some of the rarer tropical fruits that are considered to be quite cold resilient, like Suriname cherries, obviously strawberry guavas, the yellow cherry guavas, and I think really before you sort of have a go at sort of planting these outside or keeping them in pots outside in a sheltered corner of your garden, you do kind of need to understand the kind of issues involved and why people in recent years have tended to get a little bit over optimistic on what they planted outside or want to plant outside or think they can grow outside. Now the sort of reason this scenario has cropped up, there are exceptional circumstances where occasionally trees in extremely favourable positions such as avocados in central London have successfully survived a large number of years to grown to the point where they're actually capable of flowering and holding and producing mature fruit in over the course of the whole year, and they actually will carry avocados. But this has sort of brought out a burst of optimism, enthusiasm amongst people who now think that avocados are hardier than they were considered to be before, and that they're going to suddenly be able to start planting them in Birmingham and the Midlands and various other counties, even in the southeast, Essex, Kent. I think they're going to plant avocado trees outside and be picking their own avocados in 4 or 5 years' time. But I think, to be honest, nothing could be further than the truth, and having that expectation, you're likely to end up extremely disappointed. These avocado trees, of which I have seen them, and 2 or 3 of them are actually quite healthy, but 2 or 3 of them, others I've seen, are actually not very healthy and haven't done at all well. The key to these trees' success in the middle of London is exactly that. They are very centrally placed in London, or the ones that have got to a decent size, and they are in absolutely exceptional freakish microclimates where they're growing with the sort of perfect ground conditions as well. What I mean by that is the centre of London has so much protection from all the large buildings and the heat rising from the ground from things like sewers, electrical conduits, the underground train system, the heat that's held by the ground, the heat that's given out by buildings. The centre of London could almost be considered to be zone 10. The likelihood of getting I'm not talking about open parks here, because obviously if you get large open spaces, they're more exposed to the cold. But obviously, while snow can fall in London, the actual central areas around these buildings are extremely unlikely to see below 0 degrees, except in extremely cold winters. They're likely to stay around or just above freezing. You may have a ground frost at 1 or 2 degrees, but whereas where I live in the suburbs of London, you might get a typically cold night, could get to -2, the same night in the centre of London where these trees are growing, it's likely to be 0 or above. So they really are growing in a 9B zone and virtually a 10 zone when you're talking about US climate zones, whereas I'm just about 9 where I am on the outskirts of London. And the biggest enemy here really for things like avocados and citrus are our long, damp, quite wet winters that we tend to get, and the fact that the temperatures they may only drop to 0 or -1 at night, but quite often won't get above about 40 Fahrenheit, which is 5 degrees centigrade during the day. So there's no temperature recovery to take the strain off the plants. So there are several things you've got to think about. Just because an avocado is surviving in the centre of London doesn't mean that it's going to survive 30 miles outside London. And we have had some exceptionally mild winters in recent years, but I have noticed, I've been and looked at these avocados after we had a cold winter, and they actually got quite serious dieback. Now, it's the reality is with a lot of these plants that can be helped to survive outside, like oranges, grapefruits, avocados, as I said, strawberry and lemon, cherry guavas, and I'm actually experimenting with them myself. Is that for a subtropical plant to fruit successfully and carry fruits actually outdoors here, if they're growing outdoors all year round, you need several things. You need a very mild winter, a suitably warm summer, and they need to be big enough, because small plants, tropical plants and subtropicals, do not carry fruits successfully if they're outdoors, because the problem is, to carry fruits they need to absolutely be thriving, not just surviving. And one of the problems with growing a lot of these Mediterranean and subtropicals outside is all they're actually doing is surviving the winters. They're not comfortably living through the winters. They may be keeping their leaves, they might be looking green, they might be looking not too bad, but the problem is the amount it sets them back when we get a very cold or even a normal winter. It sets them back so far, there's absolutely no chance of them actually flowering and fruiting in the following year. I mean, part of the proof for that is with things like my cherry guavas, is that I have them indoors over winter, and obviously I'll bring them outside at the end of spring, beginning of summer, when the weather's warm enough. It takes them until about probably July or August to start flowering, and then if I'm lucky they will have fruits on, say, the cherry guavas as they have now, by about November. Now the problem with growing one outdoors is all year round is it's going to be that much later before it actually flowers and sets the fruit. Now I could take any of my cherry guavas, I can take indoors now as we're into November and the weather's getting obviously much colder, although we've been incredibly lucky with how mild it's been. Is any that have got fruits on, I can take them indoors and there's a good chance they'll ripen. But if you've got one plant in the garden, there's absolutely zero chance of them ripening. And the same problem's going to have it's the time frame, really. When you think about it, if you think you're going to go and plant an avocado and get fruits in 2 years' time, you're not. An avocado planted outside here is going to grow probably a quarter of the rate each year that an avocado would grow in its natural subtropical or tropical climate. In their natural habitat, they're probably going to take 6-7 years, 8 years from seed before they actually start to flower. Obviously a grafted tree will fruit younger, but a grafted tree is not going to be hardy, because you'll have even if you get a hardy-ish variety of avocado, you don't know what they've used for the rootstock. If they've used Hass, which would be a common one to use because they're so readily available, the rootstock's not going to be as hardy as the graft. So the plant's got very little chance of surviving outside in the winter. Now, as I said, if you were in, there are a few freakish warm pockets, parts of Suffolk, the south coast in Sussex and down in the West Country, possibly parts of Kent, even the warmest parts of Essex, and certainly central cities like London. There are milder areas where you can create a microclimate where your plants may survive, but if you're going to seriously try to grow some of these plants outside where it's just not suitable for them in reality, you could you need to perhaps consider which citrus, for example, to try. Now obviously there are some extremely hardy citrus which don't produce what I call good edible quality fruits, but they are usable certainly in cooking. Things like the yuzu, which reputedly is much hardier than, for example, a sweet orange or a grapefruit. But of course, as we haven't had many particularly cold winters in the last few years, until we get another beast from the east which is going to turn up sooner or later, we won't really know how hardy these plants are. But I've got a suggestion: if you're going to try grow something outside, rather than trying to plant a sweet orange in your garden or a grapefruit, you might want to consider something like the Satsuma that I've had some good success with this year, because I wasn't aware of the differences of all citrus and how long they take. But for example, a navel orange or a lemon or a grapefruit or pomelo will probably take about 12 months, up to 12 months from flower to fruit, especially in a cooler climate like ours where they don't develop as quickly. But the Satsuma plant I've got flowered in May, and it's now got ripe, completely edible fruit on it in November, so it's a six month turnaround. So to me it would make sense, if you're going to have a go with planting a citrus, for example, in your garden outside, obviously you can offer them some shelter like fleeces and things in winter, but if you just want to leave the plant fairly exposed to the elements, it might be worth you trying something like a Satsuma, because firstly the Satsumas are considered to be a much more cold tolerant citrus anyway, so they should take lower temperatures. But clearly if the plant survives the winter and it comes into flower in May or June, it does mean that you are going to get edible fruits outside here probably in about November to December. Whereas if you try, as I've got a Myers lemon in ground, by the time it gets to winter the fruits have normally only got to about 1.5 inches, 2 inches maximum in size, and they tend to turn a brownish yellow. I've noticed in winter they don't actually turn a nice edible yellow, so it may prove to be difficult unless you are fortunate enough to be in a very sheltered area. I've got a good friend on YouTube who's got quite a few citrus planted in his garden outdoors all year round in Suffolk, and he's obviously in a particularly sheltered, mild part of Suffolk which has worked very well for him. But I wouldn't like to think that many citrus would survive outside in my garden. I mean, it's particularly wet at the moment, but although I'm on the suburbs of London, I don't consider it particularly warm or sheltered in winter. I've got a yuzu in ground, and I've got a Myers lemon, which was a spare one I had in ground, to see how they go. The yuzu certainly survived last winter without any problems, but it did not flower this year at all, despite the fact that the previous year when it was in a container it flowered and fruited. Now I believe that is because of the different growing conditions, leaving it out all winter. Although citrus like a cold break in winter, they don't like icy cold particularly. That's not going to encourage them to flower. So I just thought it would be interesting to say, or at least say, is it worth zone pushing tropicals? And the answer is think very carefully about it, because they are not going to flower and fruit if they are just surviving. They really need to thrive in the outdoor conditions you're giving them for them to really succeed and do well and survive the winter and flower and fruit for you. So if you have the right conditions and you've got spare plants, I'd say by all means go for it, but don't be disappointed if it's a complete disaster, because I really do think it is likely to be in most cases a complete failure. Things like the avocado especially, even if you could keep one alive for a few years, it could be 20. The one I've seen in London, the large one, I reckon is 40 years old. So I think you're looking at least 20 years here before you might get an avocado that flowers for you and possibly sets fruit. And what you've got to bear in mind is one icy cold winter and it's likely to die back by 50% or more, and if it's a young plant it's likely to be killed to the ground. So it just by all means test these things out, but just don't have too much expectation, then you can't be disappointed by any failure. As I said, I've got a it's either a yellow or red strawberry guava. I don't know, because obviously the colour wasn't listed when I got it, and although it flowered this year, which I was very pleased with, it didn't set a single fruit. So at present I've got no way of knowing if it's likely to be a yellow or red one, and we could have a cold winter this year and it'd be killed stone dead. But obviously I'm just testing out to see what happens, because it will interest other people in the future as to whether they're prepared to have a go. But I'm not prepared yet to try things like Suriname cherries or cherry of the Rio Grande, because I just don't think they're going to survive outside without serious damage, which will of course stop them flowering and fruiting. But anyway, have a go. Hopefully you'll be able to take some videos or pictures so we can all have a look and see how you're doing. But do prepare to be extremely disappointed, because I think it's going to be a real struggle to actually get any of these, what I consider to be subtropicals, to survive outside and flower and fruit. But nothing ventured, nothing gained. I guess it's worth having a go. Anyway, thanks for watching me waffle for a while. Hopefully I'll better get this video on my processed on my phone all right, because it might not have enough memory, which means you might never get to see it. But if you do, thanks for watching the video and listening to me waffle. Please do share the video, subscribe to my channel, remember to click on the bell if you like updates on new videos when they come out. I'll catch up with you all soon. Brett out for now.